When older generations fail to lead the younger ones. Welcome back to Reasons for Truth. That's what I want to talk to you about today. When older generations don't empower younger generations, there are consequences. Listen, every single one of us reading this article was born into, or watching this on video, was born into a family on some level of birth order. Some are the firstborn, some are the middle child, or kind of in the middle. It could be more than one middle child. And some are just a baby or the youngest in the family, right? Well, that's what I want to talk to you about today in terms of, I want to show you what happens when the firstborn fails to lead as God instructs. In turn, he raises up the younger brother to lead the older. This is biblical. So let's get started. Jump right in. Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo. This is Reason for Truth, where the truth comes first, the reasons come last, but where we're always and constantly learning. So we stop learning, we stop teaching, or at least stop teaching well. If you're wondering where I'm at, well, I'm just sitting here in my office, as you can tell, and getting ready to head off for Christmas. I wanted to record this before I open up the massive studio with all the cameras. Do this right here in my office. I hope you'll enjoy today. It's interesting. I was reading in 1 Samuel, and this really touched on it because I'm kind of the middle child. So I think you'll find this fascinating. I'm going to do a two-part series. Second part's going to really talk more scientifically about, kind of like very briefly, not too much in depth, about what it means to be the oldest, does it mean to be the middle, and what does it mean to be the youngest. But as America ages, we're seeing the generational differences between the baby boomers, the Gen X's, the millennials, and now the Z generation. We're seeing that play out in really biblical terms. See, the older the generation, baby boomers in many cases, they don't want to pass the gavel on, in many cases, of control to the younger. Instead, they want to hold on to that power, their position, their resources until they drop dead. It's true, not all, but most, if not many. In politics, we find this to be especially true. I mean, for example, there was old Senator John McCain. He passed away at the ripe old age of 81. He would have went a lot longer. He passed away in 2018 of a brain tumor. But despite fighting his brain tumor for quite some time, he just couldn't let go. Couldn't let a younger person more able, with better health to do the job. And what happened? He just passed away while he was in office. Then there's Senator Dianne Feinstein. Wow, okay, so she died while clenching in fist her position as U.S. Senator. She passed away at 90, but towards the end of her life, she was unable to even walk and barely communicate well. She had given power of attorney for her daughter to communicate in her stead. But her daughter wasn't the elected representative. But listen, she still wouldn't resign. Then there's the infamous U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died at the age of 87 in 2020. She did not believe in Jesus while on earth. Obviously, she does now in his presence. Adjust my back here. But Ginsburg wasn't even showed up for work at basically her last year. She was just kind of out. No one knows what she was doing, but still, she wouldn't give up her position. She was destined. She was going to hold on to that. There were only 9 justices, right? They needed her to be in that role to function as a court. I mean, they were able to get away without her one down, they can still function. But the list goes on. So what does the Bible say about this? Well, I believe it says a lot. In the Bible, folks, there are numerous stories of God choosing the youngest over the oldest. First, there was Cain and Abel, going way back. Later, Ishmael and Isaac. Then you had Esau and Jacob. And then Jacob's eldest sons and Joseph as the youngest brother. We know that story of Joseph getting sold into slavery. And finally, we end with really Manasseh and his younger brother Ephraim. And listen, Genesis is chock full of nuts of stories of lives of 2 brothers. One is nipping at the heels of the other, is coming out of the womb, with many stories of the older being jealous of the younger for one reason or the other. But throughout the Bible, the younger brother is often chosen to lead the older brother, or certainly take the blessing of the older brother, but chosen by God in many cases for the simple reason that the older brother fails at doing something while the younger brother succeeds at the same time doing the same thing. In other words, the older brother often fails at fulfilling their responsibility, and the younger brother accomplishes what the older brother failed to do in his stead. And in the end, the younger brother reaps the rewards. What could you say? Some people say, well, that's not fair. That's birth order. Well, it doesn't work that way in God's kingdom, man. God chooses to do according to those who follow him, who are obedient to him. For example, Cain messes up in his sacrifice, but God accepts Abel's sacrifice as good. Esau impatiently gives away his birthright for a bowl of stew, while Jacob succeeds in establishing God's kingdom through patient labor. Then we find Jacob's older sons in unison, but in this case with Reuben, the oldest dissenting, a bit dissenting, miraculously selling Joseph off to the slaves, while Joseph God mercifully protects Joseph, but also, at the end of the day, through the famine, Joseph, he's basically number 2 guy in Egypt. And all this leads us today to the passage that God brought to my mind and my attention to start this whole journey into the younger, supplanting the older, but going back to the story of none other than David and Goliath. Let's read this in both the NIV and the ESV version. It's just a short passage, not the whole thing. I want you to get a good, strong flavor between the ESV and the NIV and what's taking place. We're going to want to look specifically at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 28 to 30. And the ESV says this: Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, What have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him towards another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. I'm going to read that in NIV because I think it says it a little bit more compassionately and maybe a little more clearly. But what's happening here is that David's father sends him to bring food to his older brothers. There's 3 of them there. Eliab just happens to be the oldest. So first of all, he's obeying his earthly father. Ed, his heavenly father, shows up with food for these guys. They had been hungry, and the oldest brother is just irritated by him being there. Why is that? I'll tell you why that is. Because David was the little, I think, very gifted, ruddy little redheaded kid, and his brother was just, he was the older generation. And just say, hey, what are you doing here? You have no business. So like no other reason to be mean to the guy. Let's read in the NIV. It says it this way. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger. I don't know why. He burned with anger at him and asked, Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? In other words, David's job was to be the shepherd. They're like, we're the fighters, you're the shepherd. Okay, generational thing again. Goes on to say, I know how conceited you are. This is Eliab speaking to David. I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. Now he's judging his heart. You came down only to watch the battle. You think David's watching like cable, watching a television movie or something in 3D, right? Eliab goes on to say to David, Now, what have I done? In other words, Eliab's probably always getting on his case. Now, what have I done? Said David. Can I even speak? And then he turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. So what's happening here? Kind of irritates me because I'm the middle child. I know what it's like to sometimes. My brothers were really cool with me, but sometimes older brothers can be that way in all families. And it's irritating. I think it's a generational thing. Hey, respect your elders, that type of thing. But anyways, all that being said, what's happening here? Well, in 1 Samuel is that David, as a younger man, goes up to bring food, as I said, per his father's instruction to his eldest brothers, and Eliab being the oldest. But don't forget, Eliab was just not the oldest, right? He was the firstborn. So he acts. How does Eliab act? He acts as one of the most cowardly soldiers, too afraid himself to fight Goliath, right? And little Davy does. But he's afraid to himself, Eliab, to fight Goliath. Despite his being willing and able to berate his younger brother, he had enough guts to bully him around, but not go fight Goliath. Call that a bully. So who steps in? God raises up who? The lastborn. Remember, God raised David up. Remember, he was the only. Where is he? Well, he's out in the field. Bring him in here. Anoint him as king. Lastborn David, for simply bringing him and his brothers some food through all this. David obeys God with great faith and goes off to fight Goliath without even wearing any armor because it was too big for him. The bottom line is that David's oldest brother, Eliad, was really rather abrupt with David. And what was it? It was pride. It was insolence. It was control. Not to mention Eliab's insecurity that led to his being passed up by his younger brother. This is similar language, by the way, that was used to describe the rage of Joseph's brothers when against him before selling him off into slavery. Genesis 37. Remember, they were jealous for basically what I'm saying there is that the language here, the verbiage, the words, they're all in the tone, they're all the same thing as when Joseph was sent away. It's all generational, folks. But, listen, in conclusion, so what? What's my point, Steve? So you're pointing this out, you were the middle guy, you get beat up by your older brothers? Nah, they were pretty cool with me. What does all this mean, though? Well, but I will tell you, there's definitely generational differences, even in my family. First of all, here's the point. Older brothers are meant to care for and raise up their younger brothers. An Italian family, my brothers always took care of me, always. There still was a pecking order, and, hey, that's a different story. Sadly, this often in many families doesn't happen, in terms of passing the gavel, but God sees all things and he often flips things on their head. And in such cases, we find younger brothers taking up the cause of the older ones. And this was the case even such as Joseph. So this culminates in the younger brothers as sort of a model after Jesus Christ, by the way, who he himself takes on the sins of the world. Right? The sins of those who were older, who should have known better. Much older than 33. How about the elders, the Jewish rabbis? And then what does Jesus do? He brings restoration. God does the same thing. He brought restoration for Israel through David. It's kind of a theme. I'm not saying David was Jesus, but this is kind of a theme in terms of the MO of how God operates. And in the Bible, the younger brother is often chosen to lead by God for the simple reason that the older brother fails at what God called him to do in the first place. And the younger brother succeeds at the same thing. The younger brother accomplishes what the older brother was supposed to or failed to do. And in the end, the younger brother reaps the rewards. So for those of you who are older brothers and older sisters out there, let's make certain to honor God first and foremost. Then honor our siblings and our parents and all other people. And second, if you do that, most likely you won't lose your blessing that God has for you. And then he can use you all the more greatly while on earth as the firstborn, both in humanly speaking and supernaturally, doing his plan. In the same way, let's make certain as older and younger brothers and sisters to live out the role of our birth order. God gave us that birth order. He brought us in the world in one place at a certain time in a certain order. Let's serve him. Let's do and be good with our siblings in light of honoring God and all of our siblings themselves. So God will do the rest. That's all I can say. Listen, you're going to get this after Christmas. We're going to post this after Christmas, and I just want to thank you all for tuning into the channel. I hope this was helpful. I want you to think about it. Garofalo's always, we just don't exegete Scripture. I like to put some feet to the, some hands to it, some actual application to help us better understand. Because all of us, if we were born, unless we're only child, and I didn't cover that, there was some different data on that. But listen, if we're that way, if we have older, even if we have one older or one younger sister or brother, we have a responsibility. Let's make sure that as we age, we have to make sure, especially if they're much younger than us or younger than us, that we help them. We help them be all they can be. That we help them, be successful in life. Don't hold it over the head. Even if they do better than us. I heard it said the other day, most people, almost everybody was going to root you on. I'm in ministry. Everybody wants to see me do well, but many people don't want me to be better than they are. That's a human thing. I have to make sure I don't do that, you don't do that. Let's make sure if someone does better than us, let's congratulate them, and that should challenge us to do all the more, all the better. That's all I could say. So God's blessings to you as we head into the new year, 2024. I could tell you, folks, it's going to be a barn burner, this one. Woo! Hang on with the elections and just get on your D's, pray. God's going to take us through this. America, I can say, and the world is going to be a different world coming out the other end of this, but God is in control. What we have to make sure is that as this world ages, we're past the World War II generation. That generation's gone. Now the boomers in charge. They're hanging on. And the Xers were next. I think you're going to go mostly into millennial governance. I think most of your leaders, because our Gen X group is such a small group. There'll be some of us in there, but let's make sure that even as Gen Xers that we pass on to the millennials and help them get started, and the Gen Zs in a right way. And that's what we can do. So God's blessings to you. Happy New Year. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo, and you know what I say. This is your reason for truth for today.